This is a very intense Maamar. It takes you a long time to, so to speak, learn how to think like the Maamar, and then you got to keep up with the essence of the Maamar and the details of the Maamar, the point of the Maamar and the way the Maamar is constructed. To me, the most important paragraph of the Maamar is the middle of page Ayin. The middle of page Ayin is the gist, the essence of this Maamar, and then Sif Hey and the beginning of Sif Vav is the development of that essence, is the beard of that essence. Everything else serves those two shtikelach. The middle of page Ayin and then Sif Hey in the beginning of Sif Vav, which by the way the Rebbe explains wonderfully in Sif Ches and Tes. If you want to understand Sif Hey, especially the first paragraph of Sif Vav, you have to read Ches and Tes. That's where the Rebbe explains it. The Maamar begins with the following obvious question. If it's Podoh B'Shalom, what meant Mekrav? If you're redeemed in peace and there's no war, how can you say Podoh B'Shalom Mekrav? And of course, as the Maamar develops, you learn that Podoh B'Shalom has to mean Dafki Yechido. On page Samach Tes, the Rebbe says, what happens when you fight with your Naran, with the lower levels of your Neshama? When you fight with your Naran, it's equal fight. Nefesh HaLekis has Naran, Nefesh Bahamas has Naran. They wrestle on the same terms. Nefesh Bahamas could win, Nefesh HaLekis could win, and even when the Nefesh HaLekis wins, tomorrow Nefesh Bahamas is going to fight again because it's two equal sides. When you fight on a level of Chaya, it's also a fight. But because the two sides are fighting with a weapon of will, fighting with a tool of beligavul, when one side wins, the lashon of the Maamar is he wins b'derech mamela. You overcome your enemy in such a way that the enemy completely vanishes. The only kind of a battle which you can truly call Podoh B'Shalom is the madrega of Yechida. Why? Because Yechida has no opposition. And because Yechid has no opposition, the bittul of Klippa, the transformation of Klippa is absolute, is total, and we therefore call it Podoh B'Shalom. So the Maamar asks the obvious question, if it's Podoh B'Shalom, how is it Mekrav? How could you have redemption and peace for the madrega of Yechida? There's no Mulchama. You can have a fight with the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov. On the level of Naran, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, with Derech Hislapshus. On the level of Chaya, the madrega of the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, not with Derech Hislapshus, but the madrega of Yechida, the simple the Yetzer Hara. Why can you call it Podoh B'Shalom? And that gives a very interesting answer. Page Ayin, please. We are beginning 8 lines from the top of the page. V'yesh leimar habir. I would like to explain to you the pshat. Now, Chevra, I want you to know something. This shtickle Maamar, which says something very, very radical, this is not the only place this idea appears. I would propose to you that this bir is very consistent with Tanya Perek Yud. You also have a shtickle Samach Vav, which explains the same idea. He says something very nice. The idea of Kibbut Hayumadi. Now, Chevra, without going into why, Rabbi Hayumadi goes on Yechidah. Skip the bracket, the Mizem Mashma, which proves Shapad and Mikravli who that what is the part of Mikravli that even when La'acharei Rabbi Hayumadi, which means in other words, even after you successfully reveal the Yechidah, there is still going to be a fight. And the Shaila, of course, was if you're revealing the Yechidah. And there's no opposite to the Yechidah. The Rebbe brings the Gemara. There is a shadow for Klippa, which is Chaya. But there's no shadow of a shadow, which is Yechidah. And therefore the Shaila Maamar is against Yechidah. There could be no opposition. How could you say, even against Yechidah, there's a Mulcham? And the Rebbe answers, the teachers are very gewaltig. Shigami, Shubadargin, Nemuch. It's at a very low level. What does it mean on a low level? Shenefesh HaLekis, that you're godly soul. Not only your pintliyat, your neshama b'chlal. Etzlei, and this person is behelim, is hidden. And because your neshama is hidden, your animal soul fights against nefesh HaLekis, your godly soul, says the Rebbe Mekomakim. Nevertheless, by contemplating and considering the madrega of Yechidah. Bracket v'ha'achlata, and the resolution shan hagash aleitihiyah. The one's conduct will be behetem lebechinas hayechidah shebenafshei in a way which is consistent with the level of the yechidah shebenefesh. Says the Rebbe berabim hayimadi. So then p'tiyas nefesh lekis me'amachom is the nefesh habahamis. On the one hand, you have a war with the nefesh habahamis because you're not really holding at the level of yechidah. You're simply deciding to serve Hashem like you're at the level of yechidah. So you have a mulchama, and it's be'ef and the shalom. What is the Rebbe saying in this article? These few lines reveal a spin on the whole sugya of Podoh B'Shalom. How could you have Podoh B'Shalom if there's Mekrov? How could you have Mekrov if there's Podoh B'Shalom? And the answer is these few lines. I want to share it with you. In Chassidus, there's different kinds of love. And in Seichel, there's different kinds of love. There's something called Ahava Tluya B'Davar, conditional love. What is conditional love? When I love you for a reason. Like we're both artists, for example, both musicians. When you Ahava Tluya B'Davar, you don't really love the other person. And the other person doesn't really love you. You love the common interest. You love the thing that binds you. Batal davar b'teila ahava. If you lose the thing that binds you, so the bond is gone. Then there's something called a krisis bris, a covenant. Two people love each other, and they know full well that they don't really love each other. They love what they have in common. And they say, if tomorrow you lose interest in music or I lose interest in art, we're going to lose our relationship. But we value our relationship. Let's make a pact, a covenant, a bris, that even when the thing that brought us together goes away, the relationship will persevere. It's a much higher madrege. It's on the one hand talei b'davar because it was initiated by a davar. On the other hand, it's no longer talei b'davar because it's transcended the davar. And this is the madrege of chaya. On the level of nefesh ruach neshama, it's avat tluya b'davar. Level of chaya, it's bris. But then, of course, you have the highest madrege. The highest madrege is a bris that you don't have to make. A covenant does not even have to be made. Now, don't ask me why, but the bris milah is such a covenant. What is the covenant you don't have to make? The relationship you have with your sister or your brother, or with your parents. This is a bond which is unbreakable, but it's not negotiated. It's atzmiistic. It's who you are and who your father is, or your mother is, or your children are. The bond between a father and children, a mother and children, and vice versa is an infinite bond. It's also called a natural bond. The lomdus, it's in the Maamar Chassidus, it gets very involved. But the lomdus bekitz, it is you and your father make from the same essence. You love your father because your father is you. You love your mother because your mother is you. You will love your children in Agut Shah because your children are you. There's an atzmiistic bond between parents and children, and in a slightly different way between the brothers and the sisters. It's an infinite bond that doesn't have to be negotiable. Chassidus said this is a higher madrege in krisis bris. What's the difference? When two people have a relationship based on something, and they make a covenant so that their relationship should go beyond the thing that bound them, they want to go higher than ahavat tluya b'davar, the bond can never be broken. Because a covenant by definition means nothing is going to break it. But over time you forget it. It's forgotten unless you spend time with the other person. The person forget about it. When it comes to your parents or to your children and even to your siblings, not only is an unbreakable bond, it's never forgotten. It can't be erased over time. Because it's in you. It's not something you committed to on a level of will, it's in you. Those are three kinds of relationships. A limited relationship which has been given an element of infinity, and a naturally infinite relationship. Now I want to ask you the following. What about the relation between a husband and a wife? Which category is it in? 1, 2, or 3? Al pi svara and al pi seichel, it's not category 3. Paket, al pi teda, a husband and wife are not allowed to be too closely related. If they're closely related, tegnish. Chach afila, al pi kabbalah, al pi pnimis anyonim, a husband and wife are two halves of the same neshama. But on the psychological level, on a human level, on an experience level, they have to be separate people. They're not brothers and sisters. Right? It's not even a good idea they should be cousins. So what kind of a bond do they have? This is Tanya Perek Nun, chapter 50 in Tanya, which Alter Rebbe calls a love that comes from Gvura. Most love comes from Chesed, this love comes from Gvura. And he says, what's the difference between Gvura and Chesed? Chesed is soft and Gvura is hard. Now in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe doesn't give the mashal of Ish Isha. It says in the Torah, it's also brought in Ayin Beis, Chassidus, Maamar. And basically it says the following. Two people who do not have a bond that is natural can will themselves into a state of infinite bonding. Your Ratzon is strong enough to create a Bligvul Kesher where no Bligvul Kesher exists. In other words, the relationship between a husband and a wife is equal to, and perhaps superior to, the relationship between parents and children and parents, although it has nothing to do with teva. It's not in you. It's totally from without. You're willing yourself into this kesher. So if you'll think about it, if a ish v'isha, husband and wife, have a believable ahava, an av and a ben, parents and children have a believable ahava, but there's a basic difference. A av and a ben have a believable ahava because the father is in the son is in the father. They're the same essence. In other words, they love each other because they're one. Ish and isha don't have that. They poshet have such a strong ratzon that it creates a bond which is beligavul, where no beligavul exists. In other words, one is an infinite relationship because it's inside the infinite level of the neshama, and the other is an infinite relationship that's completely outside the neshama. But that's the power of will. In Samach Vav, he brings this dugma, this inyan, and he uses the lashon kach yoasa. Kach yoasa is mentioned in Tanya when you talk about somebody who wants to love somebody else and he's not matzliach to love them. Someone wants to have an avas Hashem and for whatever reasons he can't. He wishes he had an ahava. And the Rebbe says when you don't have an ava and you wish you can have an ava, the Ratzon could give you a takeoff of a connection to the Eibishter, which is equal to the Madrega of Yechida, although the Yechida is not revealed. And that's what the Rebbe is saying here in our Maamar. If a person reveals his Yechida, there's Shalom, but there's no Mikrav. You can't have a fight with the Yetzer Hara of the Yechida is revealed. There's no Yetzer Hara of Yechida. But if you're a regular person, you do have the ability to will yourself into a Yechida connection with the Eibishter. You have an ability to want to connect to the Eibishter on a level of beligavul, though you're not feeling the beligavul of your neshama. If you're feeling the beligavul of your neshama, there's no mikrav, there's no enemy, there's no opposition. So the process, Podoh b'shal nafshi mikrav. What does that mean? You have a fight. Why do you have a fight? Because Yechida is not revealed. Yeah, but it says ki berabim ho yimadi, rabim ho yimadi goes on the Yechida. Says the Rebbe, you don't have a gil of Yechida. But you have a ratzon, which is so strong that it's equal to the gili of the Yechida. And therefore both things are true. You have a krav, you have a mulchama, because the Yechida is not revealed. And you have Podoh b'shalom, because your will is so strong that in other words, they have a connection to the Eibishter like a wife and a husband. You're not naturally bound. Naturally you're separate. In other words, there's no gili of the place where you and the Eibishter are one and the same thing. But your ratzon is strong enough to create a bond which is equal to the Eibishter. It's a very interesting hezbollah. Very interesting. How many Podoh b'shaloms have you learned? This is a very unusual insight. But the Rebbe says, if you don't say this is the pshat, then you either have to put the word mishalom and leave out the word krav, or you have to put the word krav and the word shalom. They can't be together.
You're saying that the Podoh b'shalom is something that can only happen after.
Podoh b'shalom is when there's a gili of yechida, right? Or when there's a ratzon which makes your intensity of connection to Hashem equal to the Yechida, even though it's not coming from inside.
But wouldn't my ratzon take like many years or later?
I would agree, of course. You want it with me and you. I have bigger problems. I mean, this is also a problem, but I got bigger ones. Now comes another shtickle. Ki berabim hayumadi. The Rebbe teaches in this Maamar, Ki berabim hayumadi means because the Yechida is revealed. What's he touching? Podoh b'shalom nafshi mikrav. Why are you able to have a victory which is peaceful? From a mulchama, ki berabim hayumadi, because the Yechida is revealed. Now, what is the connection between the words rabim hayumadi and Yechida shebenefesh? What is the connection between rabim hayumadi and Yechida shebenefesh? This is on bottom of page Samach Tes Rabbi Yossi, the last 4 lines of Sif Beis. Zeo Podoh b'shalom nafshi v'gei ki berabim hayumadi. The rabim hayumadi is tam on Podoh b'shalom nafshi, because rabim hayumadi is a seiras v'gila yechida k'mavur barucha b'hamaimer pedikit beis. Says footnote 13, and the Rebbe offers us no explanation, none, zero. He says rabim hayumadi is yechida. Tough luck. You don't like it? I'm sorry. I'm not discussing it. Now, does anybody have any idea why Rabbi Yomadi is Yechida? Anybody who says no has just admitted that they haven't finished the Maamar. Well, I want to tell you an idea which is not at all here. And I didn't look up I once learned the Shadei Tshuva. The Middle Rebbe's Maamar is very, very long. It's 10 blot. 10 blot of Shadei Tshuva. 10 blot of Shadei Tshuva is maybe 20 blot of a regular Maamar. It's a gigantic Maamar. It's just massive. It's by no means the biggest Maamar in the Middle Rebbe, but it's mamish. It's a trek. We think this Maamar is long. This Maamar is a joke compared to that one. And I did not look it up. I'm going to learn the Shadei Tshuva. You know, just like you have a concept of Hein Kel Kabila Yimus, that when you have 10 Yidden, the Eibush is not Memayas. You have a concept of that 22,000 Jews. What's the pasuk? What's the pasuk? Rashi brings it in Chumash, in Pashas Ba'aleischa, that when you have a certain number of Jews, there will for sure be Hashras HaShechina. 22,000, Beis Allah and Beis Revava, there will be Hashras HaShechina. The Shechina is going to rest. When you have a lot of Jews together, there's a certain koyach. The greatest koyach that could possibly be is when you had the koyach of the whole Klal Yisrael. If the whole Klal Yisrael today davened for a certain sick person, there is no way in the world they wouldn't recover. Can't be. Because the koyach of the klal, just like a minyan is not just 10 yechidim, it's a new koyach. The idea of Klal Yisrael as a klal has a moedenik koyach. Ki berabim hayu imadi means David HaMelech says the whole Klal Yisrael was with me. And I think it's a lashon from Chazal. I don't think it's a lashon from the Maamar. Yochid sherabim tzrichim lo'im. David HaMelech was a private person, but he was a Melech Yisrael. Yochid sherabim tzrichim lo'im is the Nigla language for Neshama Klolos. Yochid sherabim tzrichim lo'im, David's tefillah was like the whole Klal Yisrael davened. Because he was Liban Shakal Yisrael. He was the Nasi, the Melech. Ki berabim hayu imadi means my koyach is the koyach of Klal. And when you have a koyach of klal, you have a much, much higher koyach than you would have otherwise. And our Maamar says, how much higher yechidim? In other words, Rabim Hayu Imadi means many Yidden. And of course, if I may add, Rabim Hayu Imadi means many Yidden who are in a state of Achtus, or Hiskalulus. When Klal Yisrael is in a state of Hiskalulus, Klal, and they're coming together for one cause, as is represented in the tefillah of David HaMelech, who's speaking, that's yechidah. In other words, the koyach alaki, which is induced, which is triggered, which is sparked, when you have Rabbi, the whole Klal Yisrael together, is a madrega of Yechidim. And against Yechidim there's no liyumas, there's simply no opposition. So David HaMelech says, Podoh B'Shalom Nash B'Kravli. Why was it? I was matzliach. To have a war and win an Eifin of Shalom is because of Yigil Yechidim Ki B'Rabim Ha'yimad. Now, if you had learned the end of the Maamar, you'd have told me a different pshat than Rabbi Mahayim, which is in Perek Ches and in Perek Tes of the Maamar. Over there, the Rebbe explains Rabbi Mahayim means le'umazeh, klipa. He talks about sparks. He says sparks are stuck in klipa, right? What do sparks want? To be elevated. It says even in Zayat, but twice in Tanya, that when the Yetzer Hara makes you do an Aveda, he hopes you don't listen to him. It's his job to make you sin, and it's your job not to listen. And when you don't listen, he gets a geschmack. He did his shlichus. He made you more Jewish. It's a Hara's job not to get you to do Avedas. It's a Hara's job to make you a stronger Jew. How do you become a stronger Jew? You overcome him. You understand? So Rabim Hoyim doesn't mean a lot of Yidden in a state of Achdus. It means that the Liyumas that Yidden are fighting really secretly want what we want. How come it is that you meet a piece of food, you look at the food, and you don't see godly sparks, you see confectionery sugar? He says it's mitzad ha'adam. It's our eyes. But mitzad the David HaMizbared, all it wants is elevation. And forget, it's disappointed when we use l'shem taika. So Rabim Ha'yimadi doesn't only mean Klal Yisrael, which is already a high madrega. Rabim Ha'yimadi Pashat means the klipis we're fighting against. And we're defeating. The pnimius of these klipis is that we should defeat them and transform them, be mavatal them, and to make them into frames like he brings in the Maamar. We have a perception issue. In other words, we make them evil because of how we see them. But in amidis hadvarim, the sparks of the Eibush that we want to elevate want to be elevated as well. And Rabim Ha'yimadi means that you see this. Rabim Ha'yimadi means that the sparks of Elokus you need to elevate they demonstrate to you the desire to be elevated. What madrega do you have to be on for the Rabim Ha'yimadi? What madrega do you have to be on that you should look into a spark of Elokus which is trapped in a piece of food or clothing or whatever else and see that it wishes to be elevated? The madrega of Yechidim. When in Rabim Ha'yimadi, if you have reached a madrega where you look at food and see be'emes, nitutze kedusha, and not taivis, that's a raya that you've been megala your yechidim. Because calls a man, you're not holding that madrega, you see pizza as pizza. But when you have reached the stage of Rabim Ha'yimadi, not just Rabim Klal Yisrael, which is one insight, Yochid Rabim Tzrichim Lei, but that the Nitzutze Kedusha you're wishing to elevate are showing their desire to be elevated, that's a raya, you have reached the madrega of Yechida. Because the madrega of Yechida, that's what you see, and therefore, Podoh B'Shalom Nafshi Mikrovlik Yib'Rabim Ha'yimadi. The latter taich is much deeper than the initial taich. Even the first touch in Rabbi Yomadi is a good pshat. Rabbi Yomadi, I think it's a Maamar Chazal. Yochid sherabim tzrichim le. He's a yochid who's a whole cloud. But the keichat tzibur. But the second Rabbi Yomadi is not just Yidden, but the klippos themselves. So the pasuk says, "Podoh b'shalom nashim ekrav." How can you redeem peacefully from a war? The teretz says, because you're not holding on the madrega of yechida. You're willing yourself to madrega of yechida. Key. What is the reason for the Podoh b'shalom? Rabbi Yomadi. That you have the koyach hatzibur, you have the koyach of the klippos, because when you have this madrega of ratzon, the madrega of yechida shebenefesh, then you have that Podoh b'shalom nash. But then comes a diuk. And the diuk is that Podoh b'shalom is Podoh beis shalom. That there's two concepts of peace, not one but two. Although any person who's learned the slightest amount of Chassidus knows that tefillah and teira is shalom and milchama, all over Chassidus, the milchama is tefillah. The Zohar says, Shas leisa Shas krav, the time of prayer is time for war, and teira is drachei dar chinem v'chol v'si v'seh shalom. Teira is shalom, because tefillah is you fighting with yourself to connect to the Eibishter. Teira is simply you turning on the spigot, you bringing the Eibishter into your mind. But in this Maamar, he says, Podoh beis shalom. There's the shalom of Teira and the shalom of Tefillah. There's two types of shalom. And he compares it to several other examples. One of them is in the Parsha. V'shavti bis shalom beis avi. Taishte v'shavti beis shalom. And he's masbir. V'shavti doesn't mean I will come back. V'shavti means I will bring back with me. That Yankov went to London for the sake of Birur V'tzutze Kedusha. And he says, V'shavti, I'm going to come back from Lovin with these sparks in the madrega of Beis Shalom. In other words, Yankov Avinu is saying, I'm going to elevate sparks in the madrega of Yechida. By me, there's going to be Kibarabim HaYimadi, the sparks that I wish to elevate I'm going to see them as sparks that want to be elevated, and therefore it's going to be Podoh b'shalom nashim ekrav the Kibarabim HaYimadi. So V'shavti b'shalom Beis Avi, the Beis Shalom is the same thing as the Podoh b'shalom Beis Shalom. And then he brings a third example. That for Rav Shalom it's at least two. There's two types of Shalom. Later on he goes into the Pasuk V'Arichis, he brings the Targum and so forth. But in the beginning he just says that in the Inyan of Limud HaTorah, which is what the Pasuk V'chol B'nayach L'Deshem is about. And of course the difference between being Stama Leimed Torah and Leimed Torah in a Madrega what you call Banoyach. In the Torah, in Pashas Chanan I think, he says there's Bonoyach and then there's Boinoyach. Bonoyach is Bina, Boinoyach is Chochma. The Altikri, Bonoyach, Ala Beinoyach. How do you reach the Madrega of Limudei Havaya when you go from Bonoyach to Boinoyach? There's a whole arichas in Kabbalah. See this, what it means. Bottom line is, there's a very high Madrega of Limud HaTorah where the Torah accomplishes its task in Eifin of Shalom, and there's Beis Bechin of Shalom. Now, how can you have two types of peace, which basically mean Torah and Tefillah, if we know from experience that Tefillah is Mechama and Torah is Shalom? So the Rebbe explained. He said, let's start off. We're talking about Gilui of Yechida. Gilui of Yechida is a very powerful force. How powerful? For lack of words, let's call it infinite. Infinite force enters into your awareness, enters into your mental space. It's very powerful. It's mavatal. Any opposition is nullified. Any opposition is completely eliminated in the presence of the Gilui of Yechida Shabbat. In the Lashon of the Maamar, he uses two expressions, bittul and it's hapcha, both. It's complete transformation. Its earlier identity is totally broken. When you're magala, Gilui of Yechida Shabbat Nefesh is totally bittul. But there's one problem. You're not affecting change in them. You're affecting that they change. Now what's the difference between affecting change in them and affecting that they change? Are they still them? In effect, you're destroying the klipa, you're destroying the nitzutz. You're making it into not what it was. And therefore, although a Gilui of Yechida, as the Maamar calls it, milmayla lamata, from the top down, because there's nothing against the Gilui of the Yechida, has the ability to completely be mevatel al yumazeh, but derech memela, and it's called shalom. But this one chasad it has, that the thing that you elevated is no longer. So it's not you've elevated a thing, you have de-thinged it. And that's why it's become elevated. And therefore the Rebbe says there's another concept of shalom v'shalom. In addition to the terminologies of bittul and ishapcha, which you have in the first paragraph in Siv Hey, he brings another lashon in the second paragraph of Siv Hey. And that is, Zeh shehoya b'tchila menagid nasa oihev. And he brings the lashon HaPosuk, which the Mittler Rebbe also brings, Gam eivav yashlim imei. This is not about destroying the enemy, this is making the enemy into a friend, transforming the enemy. How? By being mislavish in the enemy. You go down into the enemy, you speak the language of the enemy, but you speak the language of the enemy to such a degree that you completely transform him. If you look on page Ayin Beis, 6 lines at the end of the paragraph page, it says, when you fix things from the top down, the fact that there's no opposition is lefishin is battle limit to you say he was bittled from his earlier form because of the light. You're not making the world different. You're essentially destroying what the world was as such. Though there's an infinite ahava, and specifically it means yechida. It transforms nefesh. But this hafich is really a yifan bittel. This transformation is leimitzad in yona the nefesh habahamis. You're not educating the animal soul. You're shutting him down. Ela mipnei ha'ava rabba nefesh l'kis. The ava the nefesh l'kis as ava rabba so much batal nefesh mitzius. What is the true idea of an enemy becoming a friend? It's bederech mulmata lamayla from the bottom up. That the nefesh habahamis should have avas Hashem mitat haseicha the nefesh habahamis. Now, the problem is, if you have avas Hashem mitat the seicha the nefesh habahamis, that's not shalom. Why? Because against every seicha of nefesh l'kis, you have a seicha of klipa. So you have to say the vart is that although he doesn't say it explicitly in the Maamar, at least I don't know where he says it explicitly in the Maamar, this idea that you're educating the Seichel of Nefesh Bahamis has several steps. The first step is you speak to Nefesh Bahamis Seichel on the level of Nefesh Bahamis Seichel, but then you add higher madreges until, in effect, you raise up the Nefesh Bahamis to understand that the Nefesh Bahamis understands. In other words, it's very difficult to comprehend how you can educate the animal soul and allow him to be an animal soul and reach the madrega of shalom, which is total transformation, especially since the Maamar doesn't explain it, but that's what the Maamar is describing. You're coming down to the level of Nefesh Bahamis, you're slowly raising Nefesh Bahamis up, shining a higher and higher level of ideas until a madrega with Nefesh Bahamis understands what the Nefesh Elokis understands in such a madrega where the behemoth is no longer a behemoth. But when you say now the behemoth is no longer a behemoth, you don't mean the behemoth has been destroyed, you mean the behemoth has been elevated. Now the Rebbe doesn't say it explicitly, it doesn't say beferish, but you have to say that that's pshat. If you don't learn here, these 2 lines on the top of Ayin Gimel, that the slapshus of Nefesh Elokis, Nefesh Bahamis, if it's only limited to the Seich of Nefesh Bahamis, that's taka birim umata lamayla, but you can't call that part of B'Shalom. So again, though the oisius are missing, l'chayr it's karav levada, it's almost for sure. The havana of the Maamar is that when you educate the Nefesh Bahamis, you do it step by step. First you speak his language, then you refine his mind, and you speak a higher language, until you're speaking a language the behemoth by itself has no shaykhs to, until the madrega pada b'shalom. So the Maamar is suggesting that although bepashtus pada b'shalom means teira, in fact it's pada beis shalom. There's 2 kinds of shalom. One is the one that we know from all of my bottom. You shine an infinite light. There's no li'umazeh, so infinite light. So any li'umazeh is completely in this battle, or nepa. And the second is you descend to the level of the liyumazeh and you slowly raise it up until his mitzias becomes a mitzias of Yechidish Rebbe Nefesh. Can I tell you I understand this second concept? I can't. But lechoyre, that's pshat in the Maamar. Okay? So if we may review at this point, we translated Podoh b'Shalom nafshi mikrav. Shalom has to mean Yechida. Less than Yechida is not real Shalom. Nevertheless, we say mikrav because we're not talking about a person whose Yechida is revealed, we're talking about a person who has a will in the Madrega of Yechida. Ki b'Rabbim ha'yim mother. We have 2 different taichinim what Rabbim means, but according to both taichinim it goes on Yechidish Rebbe Nefesh. This gives a koyach for the B'Shalom nafshi mikrovli. And then we added Podoh b'Shalom beis shalom, like V'shafti beis shalom, and like V'rav shalom b'noyach, 2 pieces that even the hislapshut can also reach Madrega of Yechidish Rebbe Nefesh. Now in case you're not confused yet, so the Rebbe says, okay, now let me confuse you for real. He says you have 2 methods of shalom, which is already a chiddush. Each one has a maila. So automatically, if you say each one has a maila, you're simultaneously saying Each one has a chassan. One is a force which transforms Mamayla Lamata, but it's Mavaka. So its Maila is how effective it is. Its chassan is, it's not the Metzias of the Klippa, it's the Metzias of the Klippa is gone. The other one's Maila is B'derech Islapshus and the Nefesh Abaham, isn't the Klippa, you're ta'aka raising up to the Metzias of Yechida, but you're missing that power of Mamayla Lamata, which calls his Habcha, or Bittel. And the Rebbe therefore says, the Tachlis Hashlemus of Podoh B'Shalom is not that you should have these two methods of peace, but that each one of the two methods should have both milas. That when you're doing Podoh B'Shalom, by shining a light, you should also have the mila al derech, the inyan of Islapshut, which is not destroying but transforming. And when you're doing Podoh B'Shalom on the level of transforming, you shouldn't only have the transforming, you should also have the idea of a bit of ma'ila l'mata. As I state in Maamar in Sif Vov, right? Ayin Gimel, the first paragraph in Sif Vov. So he says at the end, Ula Hoysif Sha'ashleimus the Shalom. Hu kishahashalom koil shtei hamaylas. In other words, shagam ba'bira b'derech mata l'mayla yesh me'ein ha'inyan des hapcha. V'shagam ba'habira sheb'derech m'mayla l'mata yesh me'ein hamayla sha'bira u'mitad inyanim shel ha'tachten. And that's a type Podoh B'Shalom. Beis Shalom, each Shalom has both inyanim. And the Rebbe doesn't give a single word of explanation. It's hard enough to understand how you can have Shalom through Islapshus. He doesn't explain that yet either. If you're educating a person, you're talking his language, how are you going to make him reach a state where he doesn't exist? Yechida, why is Yechida powerful? Because there's no Yechida opposite Yechida. You're educating Nefesh Bahamas, you're talking to the Behemoth. The Rebbe doesn't explain how you gradually go from a limited understanding to a higher understanding until you raise the Behemoth up and Ois Behemoth and a Mensch. But then to say how each one has both milas, the Maamar says nothing. And of course, like good Chassidim, we make believe we understand because we don't want to make the Rebbe look bad. Or maybe we'll make ourselves look bad. But the Rebbe doesn't explain nothing. And the answer to the question is on page Ayin Vov. Sifches and Siftes. The Rebbe goes through a whole ariches. You know, this part of the Maamar has got the very ariches. He says, not everybody who learns Teiras know Adrega Podoh B'Shalom. He doesn't bring the Gemara, but there can be some Chaim and some Chaim and some Amadas. That in order for it to be Podoh B'Shalom, the limit of Torah has to be Bittul. And the Rebbe adds a simple point. This is Sifches. And this point, it really answers. It be'emes explains how you can have in each one both minus. We are going with an assumption of conflict. We're going with an assumption of conflict. What's the conflict? Godliness and worldliness. If you go with an assumption of conflict, Podoh B'Shalom doesn't mean that there's no conflict. Podoh B'Shalom means one guy wins completely and the guy loses completely. Fine, you want to call it Shalom, I'll let you call it Shalom. But the loser is not celebrating. The loser has ceased to be. So the Rebbe says, push the zach. The reason you can't understand why these two Shaloms could be together is because you're presuming that there is an essential conflict. You're wrong. There's an apparent conflict. You ever lived via Moskva? It's like the classic Maamar Nachas Hashem. Havayahu Halakim. What's the whole point of Havayahu Halakim? Havayahu Halakim means do not think that the Koyach HaGili of the Eibishter and the Koyach HaHelam of the Eibishter are in a fight. If the Eibishter creates the world with two Malachim, Malach Mechol and Malach Gavriel, Mechol and Gavriel are in effect Havayahu Halakim and Lo Madrege. Mechol and Gavriel don't get along. What does it mean Mechol and Gavriel get along? When they stand in front of the Eibishter, they behave. But Mechol and Gavriel are fire and water. Mechol and Gavriel is conflict. When the Eibishter makes Shalom between Mechol and Gavriel, it's a Gemachta Shalom. It's a Shalom Ma'usa. He's forcing them to be B'Shalom. Now the Eibishter is pretty powerful, yeah? So the Eibishter could make Mechol and Gavriel be in a Maamar D'Matzah of Shalom, which you could call Shalom. But you know what that means? You know how Mechol and Gavriel have Shalom? Mechol is not Mechol in front of the Eibishter. Gavriel is not Gavriel in front of the Eibishter. Because if Mechol was Mechol and Gavriel was Gavriel, there can't be any Shalom. So the Eibishter is so strong, he di Mechol's Mechol, di Gavriel's Gavriel, so you have Shalom. That's not Shalom. That's just so erasing the combatants. You have Shalom because you have no conflictors, not because you have no conflict. But Chassidus says the Eibishter doesn't create the world with Malachim, he creates the world with Sfidus. Havayin Elakim. What's the difference between creating the word malachim, creating the word sfiras? Poshet. Malachim are separate entities. Sfiras are Gilia Lakus. Havaya is Magala Ein Sof. Elikim is Magala Ein Sof. It's the same Eibishter. Havaya Hu Elikim doesn't only mean that they work together. Havaya Hu Elikim means they want the same thing, they come from the same source, and they fulfill and complete each other. There's no conflict. If there's no conflict, the Koyach HaHelam of Elikim is not the enemy of the Koyach HaGili of Havaya. They're partners. They want the same thing. They're one and the same thing. The reason you can have Shalom, the reason you can have two types of Shalom, the reason you can have two types of Shalom, where in each type you have both halves, is because there's a fundamental misunderstanding. And the misunderstanding is that we're assuming that the world is the enemy of the Yechidah, but that the Yechidah is so strong that he wins him completely, and that's Maamar Podoh says, Rabbi, you're wrong. There's no enemies in the Eibishter's world. There are enemies in the Eibishter's world to those who don't see that it's the Eibishter's world. When you have a Yetzer Hara, that's not reality, that's your reality. The Yetzer Hara has managed to convince you that he's real. So long as the Hara is real to you, you have conflict. But if you're Magala, you're Yechidah Shebenefesh, there's no conflict. Not there's no conflict in you, there's no conflict in the Eibishter's world. In the Lashon Harav, the Nitzutei Kedusha are begging to be elevated. Now we may not see it that way, but the problem is not with the Nitzutei Kedusha, the problem is with us. And the whole idea of Podoh B'Shalom is you're Magala, you're Yechidah Shebenefesh. When you're Magala, you're Yechidah Shebenefesh, Kibarayim B'Hayim Mother doesn't only mean Yachat Rabbim Tzrichim Loi. You're connected to Klal Yisrael. Kibarabim Hayavadi means you're connected to the Nitzutei Kedusha, which are stuck in Klippa, that you have to elevate, because you sense their ruts into elevation. So then, you're shining a light, which is doing what? Elevating sparks, transforming sparks, destroying sparks, making peace with sparks. No, showing that you and the sparks are one and the same. When you understand this Gedank, this Wort, and remember, it's a Havaya Hu Elokim Gedank, as the Rebbe mentions at the very end of the Maamar. This Ches and Tes, it's Mamish, the whole Havaya Hu Elokim. He's telling you not Shem Havaya Shem Elokim, the Klippas in this world really want to be elevated. They're also Elokus. When you're Magala Yechida, those Klippas want to be elevated as much as you want to elevate them. And then he says, but there's two methods. One is you shine an incredibly powerful light, and in effect, you destroy them. You transform them so totally they lose their identity. But since they want this to happen to them, in a small way, you also have the inyan that nehapach l'oyev. If you see the Klippa as an enemy of Kedusha, and the victim of Kedusha of Klippa is winning a fight, you can't have how in Shalom, in terms of shining a great light, which is Mavatal or Mahapach Klippa, that it's a Keli. It's not a Keli, you're destroying it. But once you add this very simple, and to be very frank, most logical Nakuda, Klippa is not the enemy of Kedusha. Klippa appears to be the enemy of Kedusha. And when you're living on a level of Naran, it's a fight. We're living on a level of Chaya, it's a different kind of fight. We're living on a level of Yechida, you see that it's not a fight. So then, even when you mevatel the klipa completely, the klipa is somehow a keli for that hisbatlos because he wants it. He's not the enemy of the hisbatlos. So if the first method is the Torah type method, you shine such a light that you're mevatel and mahapech l'gam d'liyumazeh. Once you understand that the liyumazeh wants the same thing as you want, you can explain that he's still a shtickle keli. It's a gewaldik pshat, and it's really quite logical. Flip it the other side. Look inside. Top of Ayin Zayin, Siftes. The Shalom shall habirur. What does Rabbi Hayimadi mean? We know basically that Rabbi Hayimadi means to say this like a chib, right? That's how we explained it in Sif Beis at the end, and then again in Sif Vav at the end. Rabbi Hayimadi was a yechid. But in Sif Chas he added another gedank. What's the Rabbi Hayimadi? That the Klippa wants what you want. Shekoilo shtei hamaylos automatically includes both things. When the Nitzutei Kedusha stuck in Klippa want the same thing you want, in other words, when you reveal a level of your neshama, where you see food only as godliness to be elevated, in other words, you see the godly sparks in the food, the way the godly sparks themselves experience their desire to be elevated. Hosayres HaYechida Mizgala, you see, Shanitzutzev Shenim Soyim B'Golos. Rishus harabim, that's the word rabim. Hayui madi. Translates it, they want to be elevated as much as you want to elevate them. Therefore, 6 lines from the top of page Ayin Zayin. When you shine a light, which is going to be mevatel them, and be mahap of them, yesh boy has me'ain in a little way hamaylash habirish ubedad, as if you're elevating them from the bottom, because they're not being destroyed with your light; they're being collaboratively and joyously included in the light. Because in this case it's also he wishes to be elevated. It is only there's a very high light shown, and because the very high light shown, the effect of that bittul is it looks like he disappeared, but he's a partner. That's one side of the coin, right? Now the other side of the coin. Say this to the other hand, which is very hard to understand. But it means you go down to the level of Muhammad and you educate Muhammad, and you slowly condition him to think and to reason until he's able to understand such haskalas that have no lu'umazeh, which is a bida mumat alamayla n'mereg of yechidah, is be'efed shemizbat alais nagish latach, completely bittle the opposition. The fact that we explained before, even when you elevate, after you've elevated something from below, skip the parenthesis. He's still opposition. Because the elevation of the low one, what does it mean? He's your enemy. Coles Aman that Kleep is your enemy, and you're educating him, educate shmeducate. There's still a piece of him that has another agenda. Right? Moving 4 lines, please, from the end of the Sif test, last 4 lines. When you achieve in the Tach a level, even before you got involved in elevating him, who already desires to be elevated, then when you're elevating him, even though you're elevating him step by step, you're speaking to him on his level, and then you're raising his level to a higher level. But since he really wants the same thing you want, and therefore the beard has the mile of his battles, his hapcha. You have klipa. You want to elevate klipa, but you don't want to destroy it. So you speak the language of klipa. So long as the klipa is the enemy, that's never going to be perfect. But when you realize the klipa wants the same thing you want, then he's not so smart. Which is why you're coming to his level. Even when he still exists, he's not in opposition. And therefore the Rebbe says, this is the Havana in what I said before. There's 2 big Chidushim in this Maamar. The first big Chiddush Maamar is Podoh B'Shalom Beis Shalom. And the second Chiddush is that Podoh B'Shalom, in each method you have both. The Beis Shalom is Sif Hey. One is you're shining such a great light of godliness that the enemy is being destroyed as an enemy and becoming one with godliness. And the other one is you're making him into such a good vessel that all of godliness fits into him. So it's called Mulmata. The argument of the Maamar is that each method has both. Why? Because he's only an enemy on the surface. In other words, what's the difference between how we started the Maamar and how we finished the Maamar? We started the Maamar saying, even when you have a Gilui Chiddush of a Nefesh, Klip is an enemy. But Yechid is so strong, he destroys them all together. And the answer is, Kibarayim Ha'yimadi means, or Yibagala Chiddush of a Nefesh, there's no enemies. It's very nice. I just push it wonderful. I mean, this Maamar took a lot of laboring, but this is the gist of it. This is the gist of the Maamar. And he finishes off by speaking about Yichud Kudsha B'Rich Shchinte. He says, after you have the B'Tut Kedusha, you have a Yichud Lil El Kim, you could save Mamali, and again he does everything double. You could save Mamali, which means Mamali is Nichol and Seviv. Everything is double. It's well, it's very, very nice. Okay.